Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Q1 2016 Threat Intelligence Landscape. I am Andrew Plato, CEO of Anitian, and I want to thank all of you who are in the audience today for attending. We will be recording this, so if you zone out at any point and miss something, don't worry, we'll put the recording up on YouTube. Of course, questions are always wanted and desired, so if you have any questions about what we're talking about or just want to pick our brains on something, by all means, use the question feature or the chat feature or whatever feature you want to use within GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, and we'll be happy to answer your questions as we go along. Okay? Sound good? Well, without further ado, then why don't we get started here, and I will introduce, on this side of me, we have Adam Gaydosh, who is our Director of Security Intelligence. Good morning. Yeah. Morning, Adam. And on this side, we have Robert Cooper, who is one of our Senior Security Intelligence Advisors.
Good morning.
And one of our lead Sherlock Threat Intelligence Analysts. And there you have it. So, guys, where are we going to start today? We are going to talk, I think our first topic for the day is really to talk about the current threat landscape. A lot of interesting things happened in the last few months. Hospitals that got hit with ransomware, that was a big one. Nation state, interesting stuff. What do you think? Robert, you're pretty into this stuff, and you work with it on a pretty regular basis. So,
looking at it, yeah.
What are your thoughts?
No, it's been ramping up and getting super active. I mean, you mentioned the thing about the ransomware with medical institutions, hospitals, and clinics, and so forth. That's ramping up. Banks have been getting hit harder and harder and harder. Those seem to be coming under, kind of prolonged. Well, I can't say prolonged. They've been under attack for a long time. We're just recently discovering them because, frankly, that's how APTs work. A group goes and installs them 3.5 years ago, and we find them right about now, which means we're going to have a bunch of fun in 2020.
But I would say we really are seeing an evolution in ransomware as far as the preponderance of it and some of the mechanisms that they're using.
The ransomware, yeah, but I was more referring to like the carbon hack, the one that hits a bunch of banks, like in Russia, the kind of Eastern Europe bloc, and extracted somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion, mostly in little like 1 million, 10 million hits on just random banks.
So this was a banking Trojan?
Yeah.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know who this is, tell us a little more about this. I think this Carbon Act was kind of an interesting thing because there was supposedly a nation-state aspect behind it. So.
Yeah, I mean, you can't jump to heavy conclusions on that right off the bat because people get irritated about it. But it looks like it could have been nation-state sponsored. It could be just, a state-sponsored gang sort of affair. But it was an evolution of a previous APT called ANAC that used another bunch of stuff. I mean, when you get into this sort of thing, it starts blending all together because, frankly, a nation-state or a group is going to use whatever software is available and just morph it because it's a lot easier than coming up with your own stuff. We understand that in business. We like evolving things, and so do they. They also seem to like money because now they're using what was used for essentially espionage to extract funds. And I don't think we want to dive way deep in the weeds into how it worked, but the function of it is that people, the hackers would go up to ATMs or banks and essentially attack old XP workstations, which, I mean, as we see in the banking industry, ATMs pretty much run XP by and large at this point. Still, and we'll probably install a couple of surreptitious, very, very minute changes to the system, bits of malware, and then they go away. And then they start funneling money or altering accounts in interesting ways to siphon money off of them and get it out of there and into their own mule accounts.
There was a few things I saw reading about this that struck me as notable other than just another banking Trojan or attack. And it really gets back down to attribution there, right? And so it appears to be originated out of China, who has been attributed to a large range, of course, of APT. effectively is coined to describe these nation-state-sponsored Chinese attacks.
Well, to interject, the first traces of this seem to have been started in 2013. So that's our lag time here.
Sure. But to me, it was really notable that, the traditional goals that you're attributing to these nation-state-sponsored attacks were really not trying to actually steal money from banks, trying to steal intellectual property and other things. So seeing the straight-up robbing banks, at the nation-state level, presumably, I thought was definitely a notable change. And the other thing we talked about, this, well, there was some damage to the U.S. and other Western European institutions. It was primarily kind of in the developing world that they were being targeted.
Do you think this is, do you think this is maybe a prelude? This is like they're testing out new code, or, maybe this is like their beta, their beta rollout, or their, something like that.
Because what I've seen of it is that they self-imposed the limits of how much money they were exfiltrating from the banks. So they were not necessarily caught and went to the next one. They would cap it and shut it down after, I think, $1 million, I think, was the threshold.
It seemed variable depending on, they actually took the time to kind of learn the habits and, learn the habits of the bank, even to the point of essentially like getting or taking video footage or streaming desktop footage of how whatever operating system they were infiltrating worked and its functions.
Yeah, so the self-imposed limits, I think, could be taken to indicate that perhaps this really was a test run, right? They're not just trying to steal as much money as possible. Why the money was stolen maybe is cause for speculation, but I think that does at least indicate that might have been the case, that really is what it was. And, for me, the takeaway, the so what here, is that a lot of times when I'm talking to clients and we talk about these different threat actors that might impact their environments, a lot of times the nation-state sponsored attacks are considered to be really not applicable to your average mid-sized retailer or medical provider or like financial services, right? Or we don't really have any significant intellectual property. We don't have state secrets here. So why would they care? They're not going to come and steal $500,000. That's peanuts to a large country. But now we are seeing potentially that change, and so that to me is a point of significance here more than anything else.
Well, and more to that point, $500,000 in one hit's not significant, but if you multiply that by, say, $500,000,
sure.
It's like if you run around smashing mom and pop shops or mid-sized businesses, intelligently as these guys seem to have. They've been operating since 2013 at this point.
Sure.
So they've accrued quite a lot in these little one-for-twofers. Who's to say that you couldn't turn that around and aim it at your average business, hit them for a little bit of money, and then move on to the next one and just.
It could effectively be a self-funded, state-sponsored hacking cell.
Right.
They're like, okay, use Eastern Europe as a training ground, but you're going to have to pay for it yourself, so rob some banks.
They throw really great pizza parties when they die.
Pure speculation, of course. But to me, the key point there is this change in potential nation-state targeting, not large state secrets, not super valuable intellectual property, but
isn't this the attack they did in Superman 3 or Superman 4? It's amazing how long that's been around.
I can't remember what I mostly don't remember that movie on principle.
I think it was 4. The last one with Richard Pryor. Whatever. I think that was 3 now I think about it. But it's funny how it's like, what did that come out in 84 or something? Old tactics still work. Right?
Well, ransomware, frankly, is something that started out mostly in these types of, techno-fiction type of novels, and has slowly evolved to becoming something that has gone from an occasional nuisance to becoming a real problem. So, much like you're talking about how culture could inspire some of these attacks, I think ransomware is another good example, and that's definitely something that we're also seeing a big spike in recently.
That ramped up really hot over the winter.
That's right. And, to me, it was something that I see there that's significant is now that we're starting to see ransomware targeting mobile devices, which are becoming more and more an integral part of our lives, both personally and professionally. I know myself, if I'm on the road and my phone was locked out, I would have a problem, and I would maybe be more inclined to pay the ransomware than I would be of some workstation in my office.
Well, that's if you even could pay the ransomware. We had that example of, I don't remember the name of it right now because frankly there are billions of these things at this point, but there was one piece of ransomware that didn't work. It encrypted your stuff and then the decryption algorithm failed. So it just, your data was just gone. There was no way to get it back at all.
Yeah, and the takeaway for me with the ransomware now starting to target mobile phones is that I'm still seeing very consistently a lack of mobile device management in the enterprise. It really surprises me.
Yeah,
It's just appalling.
It is.
I mean, because it's so easy to do.
Yeah, it's basically like telephone, internet, water, mobile device management. It's basically that simple.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's not a technology problem from my perspective. No, what it really
not
is,
anymore.
It's a policy problem. People find their mobile devices to be such a personal thing, especially when we're talking about supporting BYOD, which is so widely performed. There is a lot of pushback or reticence, I think, on the part of the enterprise to try to enforce policies and technology controls on their employees' personal devices. So they get the pushback from rolling out MDM, and so they just don't.
Which is so weird because the MDM industry was so hot there for a while. And I mean, it seems like everybody was buying them and they were everywhere. And then it matured and got very commodity. And it's such an easy thing to implement, and it's relatively unobtrusive even in today's world.
Sure.
But
you mean like UTM and threat intelligence?
well,
No, but the fact is, people get, when you present the policy to the board that says we're going to have all of our users acknowledge we have the right to track and remotely delete their personal phones once they sign this acknowledgement, you're seeing a lot of pushback there. The only thing I could say is that the increase in ransomware now targeting mobile phones could be yet another arrow in your quiver as the security team to try to sell your enterprise on the value of MDM and protecting company assets.
one of the things I thought that was interesting in your blog recently, so Robert does a monthly blog for our Sherlock team, and you talked about this, so the Internet of Things is, I mean, it's been such a buzzy topic. And I'll admit, I've even been kind of like, yeah, whatever on that, just because whenever there's a super buzzy hot topic in security, I think it's just sort of natural for those of us who've been doing it for a long time to always be sort of roll our eyes and like, yeah, this is just the latest fad. But the Internet of Things has been kind of lurking out there. And then you noted that there was a malware or an attack specifically against CCTVs, security cameras. So I thought that was interesting, and it's definitely, I guess, the IoT threat is now starting to come to fruition.
Right. I mean, it was essentially some embedded malware in just common CCT manufacturing. I think it was the DVR endpoints of it that just essentially allowed a backdoor into the system for people to come in and rifle around your security footage. I mean, we've spoken about IoT a little bit, and I'm almost kind of tempted to state the phrase that IoT doesn't exist. It's just the evolution of products. Like we were talking, we had TVs, now we have TVs with internet. That counts as an IoT device, but that's just going to be a TV.
Right.
Like in 10 years, nobody is going to care about the IoT because it doesn't exist, and so it's going to be stuff. Right. We've got, security systems and alarm systems with it. We've got TVs.
Yeah, and a PC, not a thing. Right.
I mean, smartphones are essentially PDAs with a phone attached to them, and vastly improved user interfaces and experiences. It's just that's how that evolution is going.
I think the real challenge, and I'm probably stating the obvious here, but then again, that is what I do most days. Just stand around the office and state the obvious. Is that there's a perception gradient. Ooh, there's a word.
Nice.
Perception gradient. Put that on the list of things to remember from this webinar. Between a PC with a spinning hard drive in it versus the intelligent television or the television mounted on the wall. Let's face it, people view the PC as one class of thing, and they view the TV as a very different class of thing, and quite frankly, they spend a lot of energy and effort managing, controlling, and tweaking dinking around with that PC, and they spend almost no amount of time thinking, worrying about that TV.
Right.
But they're both basically just PCs.
They're both just computers.
Yeah.
I think
Devices.
I think it really comes down to the enterprise sees it as there's nothing we can do about this. We're not going to customize the firmware to mitigate security vulnerabilities. We're dependent on Samsung or the hospital pill dispenser manufacturer to update these devices. So what can we possibly do? What we can do is manage our endpoints.
Right.
So that's where we should focus.
Well, you can manage your infrastructure.
That's the important thing that I think is really overlooked a lot of times is, okay, I get it. You have IoT devices, especially in healthcare, which is really where it's has the most potential impact, right?
Yeah. But I mean, how many times have you heard this? I mean, in audits and assessments we do, right? They always say, well, we can't patch it, and we can't control it, and the vendor won't allow us, and they have to have remote access.
I say, so what?
There are compensating controls. You can segment it. That doesn't mean it needs to have access to the rest of your infrastructure.
Yeah, classic defense in depth.
Yeah, you don't need a flat network for this thing. It doesn't need access to your DCs or your computers or your servers or anything. It needs access to an address on the internet and through the firewall.
And I'll use
a VLAN segment and a couple of rules, and off you go.
I agree with you 100%. I'll use the CCTV malware as an example here. First of all, that's not new, right? We've seen other pieces of malware targeting security systems and the like. And in fact, I advised on a breach for a client that used the security camera not because they were interested in gathering the security footage, but because it was the most easily breached device, and because they did not have good network security hygiene with appropriate segmentation, they were able to use that as their beachhead to pivot into the network, right? And so I think that is the important point. Sure, you have these pill dispensers that might be high value, can still all of the narcotics or, you know, possibly cause someone physical harm, depending on what we're talking about here. And that type of malice hacking may occur, but really I think the more likely threat vector is to use these devices, which are probably not maintained as diligently as your regular patch management cycle, as that beachhead into the network. And that's how you see it. If you could mitigate it, as you just described, by having them on isolated, fully segmented as much as possible IPS between those boundaries, all the other type controls that you can do around that, it really will minimize that risk.
And also, as a pen tester, I don't care what the device is.
Right.
When I'm looking at a network, if I find an entry point in, great, I've got an entry point in.
Yeah.
It does not matter one whit to me what it is.
You drop a shell and can pivot to whatever it's
if I can do
trusted
that,
to access.
then it's the best thing in the world for me.
I think there's always this perception that it's like this television is some little Linux box. You know, what could I really do with it? And the fact is that that's just it. It's a little Linux box, which means you can do a lot with it. And like these are not like some special, unique firmware that was custom built, like for the space shuttle. I mean, this is these are standard garden variety, SE Linux kind of installations.
Probably not. But
probably not SE Linux. Sorry. Probably Red Hat, yeah. Or anyways, they're standard Linux installations that have all the vulnerabilities that all the other Linux systems in the world have.
And there's always a perception when you're talking about defending these sorts of things that it seems like the realization of the scope is limited to that device. Like, who cares if we hack our TV? I don't care if they hack our TV. Well, I care if I hack your TV and I can go to another system through it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, in a network, everything is connected if you make it connected.
Right.
Which is why you need to have segmentation so that everything isn't connected. Right.
You
It doesn't need to be business justifiably connected.
Right. It's true.
Let's move on to this Joker's Stash credit card thing. I thought this was interesting.
So this is just a new carders forum for selling compromised or stolen payment cards, credit cards. I think the notable...
He's been on the Krebs blog.
On the Krebs blog, and in fact, on their Joker Stash website, they bragged about how Krebs is covering them and see them for Krebs for more information.
You've really gotten to the, to the royalty of the hacker world when you're on the Krebs blog. So that's like the metric for success now.
To me, what's really notable about these guys is they claim that all of their cards that they're selling are their own compromised, stolen cards directly, right?
High quality.
Virgin cards, they refer to them as, right? Versus once they've been passed around and could have been used so many times, by the time you're buying them, they've already been reset. And so far, and he promised he would be releasing large batches for sale. And so far, and claims that he has a huge amount of already breached cards from major institutions that he will be releasing in turn for sale. And so far, the initial trend is absolutely backed up exactly what he says. And so that, to me, is the real scary. And some of these have been traced back to some of the bigger headline breaches that we've had in the past already, right? And so, to me, what that really shows is there's still a major high risk of stolen credit cards. I know that people are have the breach fatigue with this, and I know that the PCI Council has done a great job in trying to mature the standard and enforce the standard, and we work with a lot of clients that are really doing great things with protecting their cardholder data environments, but the fact of the matter is they're still getting compromised, and this latest card reform, I think, is scary with what they're probably going to be releasing if they continue to be able to follow up with what they've already bragged about.
I think what's interesting and really the notable thing I would say on this is that, and I think this is just an example of this, is how the hackers, these attackers, these people are frankly just getting more savvy as business people. I mean, they're becoming, frankly, pretty interesting sort of entrepreneurial sort of, startups here, and they're coming to market with some very innovative approaches. They're marketing that. Their marketing is resonating with the, I mean, you're talking about some of the greatest innovation now in information security is happening amongst the bad guys.
Well, didn't you say that they had like a fairly slick sort of support system for?
Well, there's a loyalty program.
Oh, right.
That
was the thing. Yeah. So what is it? You can earn like loyalty points.
All right,
like you buy so many credit card numbers.
All right, you get credits or something. It's like frequent flyer miles, effectively.
Right.
Just buying stolen cards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, there's definitely some.
Buy 100,000 stolen credit cards, get 5,000 free.
Yeah.
And then the natural evolution of that should be that they start analyzing your credit card buying patterns and analyzing which sorts of brands you tend to prefer.
Right.
So when they have a new batch of Visa cards that you've been liking a bunch, they'll send you an email pinging.
Do you like going to Costco?
Yeah.
Now, most of these cards are
they're gonna work and create like teaming agreements with retailers. Spend your
there's a
spend your stolen credit card at this company.
There's a dystopian nightmare hell.
Yeah, that is kind of scary. I think that's what happened in Blade Runner or something. So, anyways, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was going to say, I mean, most of these cards these stolen cards are used to manufacture dummy fake cards and then make purchases at the big box retailers that you can then sell or whatever. And so I'm hoping that the EMV chip and pin that they're pushing out, well, not pin, actually, of course, as we know here in the U.S. Council's already said they'll never be pushing out pins in the U.S., but the chip, which is much harder to manufacture and counterfeit than, of course, the mag stripe. Hopefully that'll mitigate some of this, but until that is really fully adopted and enforced, even then I still think you're still going to see this because it's not impossible to manufacture.
And you don't even really necessarily need to, because you can always get into the malware or the POS or whatever, and you can use them online. And I mean, there's plenty of other ways to use these card numbers that have nothing to do with actually producing a physical card. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
So while we're talking about PCI, I just want to take a moment to derail the conversation.
This is interesting.
I was on a webinar this morning for QSAs, the Qualified Security Assessors for PCI. There's a private webinar for us held by the Security Standards Council for PCI, talking about the newest version of PCI 3.2, which is going to be released sometime in April. They already released a preview, which I've blogged about on the Nation blog. If you haven't seen it, take a look. And everything that we talked about there was reiterated by the council with a few additional clarifications. So to me, the biggest takeaway that I got there, I know a lot of people have been concerned because PCI considers their standard to be a mature standard, which means any changes would be minor incremental differences. But there's a few, I think, bigger changes here than they are giving credit for. The biggest one being they are requiring multi-factor authentication for all administrative logins within the CDE, period. It's used to
regardless of where it comes from.
Used to just be from internet access. Now it's If you're coming from your corporate network into the CDE as an admin, that login needs to be two-factor authentication. That is a lot of people concerned about the cost of implementation and structural changes to their network architectures, et cetera. And when they initially announced the heads up about this that I blogged about, they said that, and then I actually met with Troy Leach, who's the CTO at RSA, and got a little bit more clarification on
CTO of the PCI Standards Council.
That's right. And so I was talking to him at RSA, and he gave me a little more clarification on the timeline, which is that the 3.1 version that is current can still be used while the 3.2 is live, effective the day it goes live, which is going to be sometime in April. But you can no longer audit against 3.1 6 months after the release of 3.2, which means you basically have a 6-month window from April to October during which you can still audit 3.1, after which you have to be auditing against 3.2. And so, of course, all of our clients who have Q4 assessments immediately wanted to push their audits into Q3. We were not thrilled with
resourcing as usual.
But there's good news for us and for everyone else as well, except for those that are actually concerned about the security of the payment infrastructure and believe that these changes are appropriate and warranted. And that is that the 3.2 version of the standard, all of the new requirements such as multi-factor authentication, there's others I blogged about, at the requirement level will be optional until February of 2018, which means that we could be auditing against 3.2 effective immediately, and the only requirements that we really have to audit are those from 3.1. All of the new requirements that are in the 3.2 version of the standard are optional until February of 2018, which is, what, 22 months. So,
which creates a nice, confusing, complicated, and overly ridiculous kind of.
right.
I mean, the big problem is that's like adding complexity to something that's already complicated and confusing.
It's definitely long enough to forget about it for a while.
Well,
Yeah, sure. And, what's the point of having the sunset, the overlap of, not deprecating 3.1 until 6 months after it's released, you would think is to give organizations time to implement those required new controls. No, what it really seems to be is to give QSA firms time to update all their audit material, which is great.
That's nice.
I own a lot of that, and it's tedious, and so I appreciate the time to update it all. Don't get me wrong, but as a security practitioner first and an auditor second, I really do believe that the council is doing great things to try to reduce the risk to the payment industry, which affects all of us as consumers, of course. And I was really disappointed to see that some of these new controls that they're implementing to try to tighten it down, they're basically pushing off for 2 years. So that was kind of a bummer, but it certainly gives everyone a lot of breathing room. So if your QSA is not us, it should be, first of all, but if your QSA tells you that you're going to have to be audited against 3.2 and you see that you're still in that sunset window and you feel strongly you should lobby for auditing against 3.1, I would say that there's really no concern there. You don't need to do that because you can be audited against 3.2 even if you don't have any of the new controls in place because they're not mandatory until 2018 or February.
I don't know, though. It's kind of one of those, what are you waiting for sort of issues? I mean, you might as well implement them. They are good controls, and it isn't going to necessarily get any easier in 22 months. I think the big mistake sometimes with a lot of these audit things is people say, well, it's not due for 22 months, so I'll worry about that in 21 months.
But I strongly...
And then they try to ramshackle the whole thing together at the 11th hour. They, of course, invariably call us up and say, can you audit this? And we're like, yeah, that'll be in 9 months, when we have a free spot. And then the whole thing kind of falls apart. So,
or it's only looked at for the first time when it is actually mandatory and they realize they didn't quite get it correct. Because there's some complexity beyond multi-factor authentication that I don't want to derail this threat landscape meeting too much, but it's in the blog talking about these business as usual practices and formalizing a PCI compliance program that I think people will probably need a second set of eyes and a second pass to get right. So I agree with you, Andrew. I strongly recommend that you start implementing these controls now. And so when you have your next assessment, even if they're not getting audited because they're not mandatory, have your assessor look at them.
And give you an opinion.
And give you an opinion and say, look, if these were mandatory, they'd be fine, or no, they're not, and here's what you need to fix. Get the free consulting out of the audit. Don't wait until they're mandatory and it becomes a pass-fail situation.
Yeah.
What do you essentially say at that point that you're recommending that people implement security as best practices and then use the compliance as essentially a sanity check?
Ding, 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 ding.
At the end, rather than implementing security for compliance.
That's exactly.
Which we have some sayings about.
Yes, which we say all the time, right? Use the compliance as the tool to get to do the right things, but do the right thing first. So speaking of doing the right thing, I think it's a good time now to talk about, to froth about RSA, because RSA Conference was last month. Is that last month now? Yeah.
Yep.
That was like 4 or 5 weeks ago.
Wow,
It was at end of February.
End of February,
Okay.
right. Adam and I were there.
Which was much earlier. I just was updating CPEs for something, and last year's RSA was first week of April, I saw.
Yeah, they moved it up a little
That's what I
bit.
remember too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quite a bit. So,
So Adam and I were there. I, of course, blogged extensively about it, and if you had a chance to hit my blog, it was, as usual, I did my nightly sort of, stream of consciousness dumps about what I saw all day.
And your Twitter.
And my Twitter, that's right. Yeah, I was. I think it's the most activity my Twitter feed has had in forever.
Yeah, that's weird.
certainly mine is that way. Goes dormant every 11 months or so.
Should just rename it Adam RSA.
Yeah, probably.
But what do you think? I mean, I have my opinions, but I'll wait and I'll give you your first shot at RSA, and then I'll probably I'll probably froth my own things about it. So.
I was looking to be inspired, and I wish I could say that I left inspired, but I was not. And I don't mean to sound cynical and curmudgeonly, but
that means he's going to.
So here it comes, everybody. He's going to sound curmudgeonly.
the fact of the matter is that there were some continuation of trends that I find to be troubling within our industry. We talked about this last year, and it still seems to be the case. And I know a lot of it is because people were really focusing on the newest technologies and the newest marketing terms and the newest opportunities to sell things, necessarily the entire spectrum of IT security and how it should be done properly. So there's always a bias to the new, but the fact of the matter is there seems to be a really consistent perception that the breach is inevitable. There's nothing we can do. So everything's really just focused on how can you find it, contain it, and clean it up. And that's incredibly important. It's a big part of our business. Sherlock, if you haven't explored the Sherlock service, take a look. That's what that's all about. But the point is you should not rely on that. It's like driving a car with no brakes because you have a seatbelt. You've got to, and for the security community to seem to have just basically thrown up their hands and said, there's nothing we can do, so let's just focus on detection and cleanup. And I find it to be very disheartening. So that was a real bummer. I found from it that is continuing to be the case. And I certainly see where it comes from. I get it. We still see this so consistently that the CISOs of the world are basically internal advisors. They have no ability to check.
Cannot affect change.
We harp on this all the time. We see so many people that go, the CISO's the dream job. They're a security practitioner, firewall, whatever, network security operations, and they finally get that CISO job and they realize that they really don't have that ability to affect change. They're liable for all the blame when things inevitably happen. They can't enforce the security standards that they might have written. They're not getting the buy-in they want. So the only thing they really can do is focus on developing their IR program and forensics and the things that they own. And so I certainly understand that, and that's a whole different problem.
I actually think the problem, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I think the other problem that happens is a lot of these CISOs, what they do is they kind of become obsessed with these frameworks and compliance, and they try to basically like slap those on the organization as their kind of their only tool to get the organization to do anything, which just kind of breeds this resentment sort of process, right? That the CISO comes in, starts pounding his fist. We must be PCI compliant. We must be ISO 27001 compliant. And everybody's like, ugh, because then it becomes about just aligning with a framework. It's not really about security. It's about trying to meet some list of...
Because there's no pragmatism there.
Right.
Well, and do you think that's honestly because that lends an air of immediacy and credence to their position? Like, if we're talking about CISOs not being able to affect change, but there's this outside entity that comes in and says, here's this framework, your organization has to be compliant. The CISO can grab onto that and say, okay, I've got some backing now. These are things that are coming down, not from me, guys. I'm just the messenger here. These have to be implemented.
Yeah, and it's true, but the problem, and that works to a certain level, but the problem is that when you look at the rest of the organization, and speaking from sort of that CEO point of view, if somebody comes into my office and says, Andrew, there's this external third party who's requiring us to meet these this big complex set of requirements, so they're going to take our birthday away, I'll be honest with you, my first reaction is, well, flip that. I don't care what they say. This is our business. We're going to do it our way. There's a natural just, sort of, no, I don't care what they say. Or worse, it becomes easier to start arguing and complaining about the standard than it does to just do the right thing. So then you end up in this kind of like churning process where organizations like, CISOs are fighting to get acceptance. They're fighting to get respect. They're fighting to get compliance things, but then the whole organization becomes kind of bitter and resentful because they feel like they're having this third party kind of, this external entity telling them what to do, and they don't like that. And so that kind of creates this really bad sort of, feedback loop within the organization. And then ultimately what happens is the CISO kind of gets slowly but surely kind of, de-empowered, unempowered, denigrated. There you go. I don't know. That's what I see. I see the problem is that they're grabbing onto things that don't actually send things in the right direction. They just kind of breed this resentment.
Well, what other choice do they have in the current environment?
Well, and I think that's maybe a good segue. One of the topics that came up at RSA this year, and it was a keynote by Chris Young, right?
Right.
Intel, right? Intel, McAfee, Intel. I guess you're not supposed to call him McAfee anymore.
Unless you're voting for him.
Unless you're voting for him. Right? That's the other McAfee. Yeah. So he brought up this, what was it?
So
the talent crisis.
Yeah, right. It is. This has really resonated with me because it's been lingering on my Twitter feed for quite some time. So it's obviously gathering quite a bit of conversation around this particular keynote. And it was basically that we have a security talent crisis is basically his primary thesis there. He basically says, I can't hire enough threat hunters, enough IR guys, enough forensics folks. There's just not enough talent out there. And so he was talking about how, we need to integrate this into colleges so we can have these people that have never touched a computer immediately become forensics analysts right out of college, which I strongly disagree with, of course. But ways that we can try to empower people to grow security talent. And I recognize there is a shortage of security talent in the industry. We face this all the time with our recruiting, of course.
It's very difficult to hire for those sorts of positions.
Right.
Very difficult.
But I have to push back on the thesis that we even need to. I think the problem is that we have a leadership crisis, not a talent crisis. The only reason he needs to hire 10 million threat hunters is because he clearly does not have the buy-in he needs to affect change in his organization. It's because he knows that he could be writing standards all day long on how to harden your servers and your network devices, but he's basically, presumably, or at least other CISOs I've certainly talked to, are in an advisory role when it comes to, okay, network ops, I see these switches and routers are still running telnet and your firewall rule sets are promiscuous and all these other problems are not aligned with my standards and I'd really like you to do something about it. And they say, thanks for your opinion, get out of here.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, what you're really talking about is it's kind of this isolation of InfoSec is that I think a lot of organizations, they appoint a CISO, they hire maybe a security guy or two or three, they buy a bunch of gear, and believe me, I'm going to froth about gear in just a minute.
No, RSA is a
I'm getting there. That's coming. Right? But what happens is they kind of, what do? They take the security guys, they squirrel them away in a back office. I mean, I remember one customer of ours, the security team was like literally in the basement, like in a closet.
That's where they like to be.
Yeah, that's true. That's the other problem. The security guys actually like to be there. But the long and short of it is they kind of they isolate them, and it becomes, the system admins, the focus of their job becomes make it work. I don't care how, make the system run, make the app run. The network guys, their mission becomes make the network run. Don't care how, don't care what you got to do, don't care what you got to plug in, not plug in. Just make the network work. Application developers kind of work from the same mentality. I don't care how it's done. I don't care what code you use. just make it work. And that's really an outgrowth of the IT industry and our whole industry over the last few years, this business mentality of, I don't care how, just make it all work. But now they have to have a security guy because it's required in PCI and whatever. And so they say, fine, hire a CISO, hire these guys, stick them in the corner. But what ultimately happens is the system admins and whatever, they go, well, that's security. That's not my job. I don't do security. I'm not responsible for that. So they essentially just kind of ignore the problem because that's the security guy's problem. Well, the security guy has absolutely no power to affect change. He cannot or she cannot do anything to improve security. The security people have to, as you say, constantly trying to cajole people into doing the right things. And the fact is that if it comes down to, okay, I'm either going to, I can do my job and make the system run and get out of here at 5 and go home to my kids, or I can get the system running and actually harden it and make all the other security crap work, but I'm going to be here till midnight every night. Well, screw it. Security ain't my problem. I'm not going to deal with it. And so these system admins and network admins just kind of throw the problem over the fence, and then it kind of goes nowhere.
And hardening isn't really necessarily the business requirement. Like, hardening doesn't make anybody money.
That's right.
Well,
which is a problem.
That gets back to, I think, the technology industry, we have to admit, there's a lot of, while it started in the great glory days, motivated by the technology for the sake of progress, once the .com era of the late 90s hit, it was all about greed, right? And so we still work with so many companies that are in perpetual startup mode, and they're just trying to flip their company and cash out. And so anything that they do that slows that down or impedes that process gets in the way of their end state, right? And so security is just a pure cost is the way they see it. I would strongly disagree with that.
Which is why you end up having a whole industry of checkbox auditors who, as we know, will come in and there you go, you're good to go, you're compliant.
I've got my great new cloud service, but I can't go live and get the demonstration of initial clients until you sign off my PCI assessment so I can then quickly sell it to some PE guy. So please quickly audit me and sign it all off. We see that every day. It's ridiculous.
Speaking of private equity and venture capital, so one of the things I got to do at RSA this year, it was the first year I got to do this, was go to AGC, the America's Growth Capital event, which is, so this is run in tandem to RSA. It's the first 2 days. It's Monday and Tuesday. It's basically, this is a show where there's probably about 500, 600 people there. About half of the attendees are private equity, venture capital, corporate investors, basically people with money. And then the other half of the audience are people begging for money. And then there was me somewhere in the middle. And it's various companies and businesses that are either looking for another funding round or they're looking for an investor or a buyout or a merger or whatever, right? And one of the really fun things is at AGC is they have this giant room, right? It's huge. It seems to go on forever. There's all these tables in there, and they all have numbers on them, right? And it's like speed dating. So you can book a meeting with a private equity or a venture capital guy, and you get like 15 minutes to do a pitch, right? You sit down and you say, hi, I'm Andrew Plato from, Zippy Bing Bang. Here's my product. It's awesome. And then the PE guy sits there and goes, okay. Well, I got the chance to I kind of camped out in that room, which you're not actually supposed to do, but whatever. So I kind of camped out in that room for a while, and I just sat there listening to a lot of these pitches amongst all these companies. And what was really, the first thing that sort of caught me was that a lot of the investors are a little more technical than I think people realize. So that was surprising. I was surprised that they knew the questions to ask, so they were a little more savvy than I probably would have initially expected. But what really got me was how incredibly bad and how most of these companies don't seem to even really know what it is they do. Yeah. They cannot communicate their purpose. They're all chasing like point little things, and they're just chasing these kind of one-shot kind of ideas. And in many cases, it's like one of the hot ones right now is identity-based security. Okay, it is fascinating, and don't get me wrong, I think that's an interesting dimension of security. This idea that you have security policy and management and controls based on the identity of users, and you have various security technologies that can do this. But what you're seeing is these companies kind of jump into the industry and they're saying, well, we have an identity-based security solution. Well, what does it really do? Well, you know, it does stuff and things, and it's cool, and it's awesome, and it's threat and intelligence, and, you know.
It is security based on identity.
Yeah. And
that's what my identity-based security management platform is.
But they can't seem to really explain what it is they do. And that's what I realized is that first off, they don't even know what it is they do. And they're really just kind of selling a bunch of good ideas. Their technology is of, you know, and no better example of this problem came to light at RSA, and you knew I was going to bring it up because it was inevitable, right? But Norse, right? So Norse, for those of you who don't know, was a very splashy cybersecurity company that made a huge splash last RSA. Well, this RSA, like the week before, news came out on the Krebs blog, and then it kind of filtering out everywhere, that the company basically imploded. The investors came in and basically seized everything. They booted all the employees. They fired the CEO. I actually blogged about this and wrote an analysis of this on my but when I wrote about this, I said this is kind of the canary in the coal mine, because Norse is the beginning of the great reckoning, the great fallout, the great implosion of cybersecurity, because essentially when you walk the floor at RSA, one of the first things that became very apparent to me is that this is an industry that is absolutely filled with hucksters. I mean, you're talking wall to wall, a place filled with, you know, Saul Goodmans out there hucking, and Saul Goodman's from Breaking Bad, but it's hucksters. It's people hucking their, you know, their latest and greatest, and at the end of the day, when you really start peeling the layers back on a lot of these technologies, number one, there really isn't that much there. What is there is marginally valuable, but it's not integrated into the whole. It doesn't fit with everything else.
Well, because the intent was not necessarily to make a great new security product. It was to make something you could sell and make a lot of money.
Right. And
here's what happens in industries when it becomes,
right,
it becomes hot.
But here's the thing that people have got to hear. So there's this notion, right, is I create this great cybersecurity company, and then I flip it for billions of dollars or millions of dollars, and then I go, you know, I go move to my island, right? Right, I buy several Ferraris. Here's what's happening, though. The PE, the corporate investors, and a lot of these people, what's happening now is they're saying, look, no, I don't want your crappy, poorly thought out piece of technology. I'm not interested in this. I want to buy something with a proven market. I want to buy something that's got an actual client base. I want to buy something that's got a fundamental to it. I don't want to buy some splashy nonsense stuff. The only place you're seeing these super innovative technologies go is to the larger corporate type buyers. So the Ciscos, the Raytheons, the bank, you know, the bigger guys that are out there that are buying these. Cisco's acquisition of OpenDNS is a good example of that. It was a very strategic acquisition decision because OpenDNS had a real fundamentals to them. So I think what everybody really needs to hear is all of these exciting startup, flashy cybersecurity companies, you need to take the time to really think about what their future viability is, because a lot of them, and I mean a lot of them, are going to go the way of Norse one way or another. They're going to implode. They're going to either get snapped up by somebody who doesn't know anything about them, or their technology is just going to get sort of watered down and pushed aside. And that's starting to happen, and Norse is really just kind of the beginning of that.
I would just add, it's important to note, we're not saying to not invest in technology from a startup company, because, you know, that's where a lot of innovation is born. And so I think the really important point here is that we are seeing a greater percentage of these new startup technology companies on the floor at RSA that are basically 99% BS, lots of smoke and mirrors, and there's really nothing sophisticated or new or evolutionary under the hood. So you really need to understand, if you're looking at the next threat detection, analytics, endpoint, whatever technology that is supposed to be, you know, reinventing the wheel here, make sure you really understand that before you invest in it.
And don't get us wrong, there is innovation there. I mean,
Exactly.
I've been a big proponent of Cylance, for example. I think Cylance has a genuinely innovative technology. I think Cylance has a future. They're going to get rolled up into something or something. So I mean, but the reason is because there is something actually innovative there, and they've got some decent funding and whatever. So Cylance has a future, right? They're going somewhere. I'm maybe not sure, but then there's so many out there that are trying to kind of be like Cylance, or they're trying to do this, and it's all froth and huck. It's all a show, basically. And frankly, and this is where I'm going to froth now. So,
Sure,
and I know, so this is, if you want to just zone out for this is where I'm going to froth about the technology industry. I'm going to lay the blame of all of this right at the feet of, and you know it, and you know it's coming, VARs and resellers, because these are the people who are causing a lot of these problems. These are the people who are creating environments within organizations of this constantly trying to buy the next shiny object technology. They're constantly pushing product. They're constantly pushing, oh, you got to have this. All the big boys have it. If you don't have it, you're not a big boy. You're not going to get to play in the big boy game. And because of that, they create this environment within organizations where they're constantly chasing new technologies and never making those technologies have any value in the organization, which leads to essentially this I give up sort of thing. I think the reason the industry has given up on stopping the breaches or protecting and moved into this, oh, well, it's inevitable kind of approach is because VARs and resellers keep pushing products and vendors keep pushing technologies that are never fully realized within the organization, and so therefore never deliver the protections they're supposed to. And I got to get my one last froth in on this, and admittedly, and Adam always reminds me, well, Andrew, you're just bitter because, we were in the VAR industry at one point. Yes, I'm a little bitter, and I don't think that's a mystery. It's hard not to see that. But our bitterness, I think, really comes from, we really wanted to be the independent, advisor, and we realized we couldn't. And that was, I think, the frustrating thing is that it is absolutely and completely and structurally impossible for an organization that sells product, that is a reseller, to be vendor agnostic. It is completely impossible. And I don't care what their marketing tells you, they can't do it because they can't go into an organization and say, oh yeah, such and such, they're not a very good product, don't buy it, because I guarantee you that partner, that VAR, that manufacturer is going to be on the phone with them 30 seconds after that meeting, yelling at them, telling them, how dare you ever say anything negative about us? We're going to pull your partnership, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what is happening, I think, in a lot of organizations, and I'm getting to the end of my froth, so I apologize if I've taken too long on this. These VARs, these resellers, these vendors, these technology companies, they become way too influential in the organization. They influence, they take the CISO out to lunch, they tell him how important he is, they have way too much influence amongst the leadership in the security departments, and so therefore they create this process that we're going down, and I think it really is, that's the sort of beginning, which is why our advice to every client we ever talk to is you must extremely tightly control the VAR and vendor relationship process. No discretionary access to your staff. Quite frankly, I've advised CIOs and CISOs, any chance I get, do not allow VARs to speak to your security team, ever. Don't allow them to take them to lunch. Don't allow them to do demos. All of that needs to be extremely tightly controlled. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
I mean, there's just so many tangents I could go off on that topic, but I would say one of the most fundamental things I see, especially if we're going to pick on the VARs here, pushing product down on enterprises, is the salesperson never mentions the total cost of ownership when you're buying the next compliance appliance, the silver bullet, right? The thing that's going to solve all their problems, right? The not sure. So, and that's a huge thing, right? You buy the new SIM, the new security analytics platform, the new endpoint threat detection agent, okay? And you budget, okay, it's going to cost me whatever cost it is.
100K.
100K, and then your annual licensing, and there it is. But did you factor who's going to run it? How much time does that take? Do you need to have more staff? Do you have anyone on staff that has the expertise? Is there going to be trainings required? There's a lot of additional cost for total cost of ownership that is never discussed in the pre-sales, that I think is why I so commonly see when I'm doing assessment work, people that have these shiny new things that are really not doing anything. Oh yeah, we really haven't fully deployed it yet. But you've had it for 2 years. Well, that's
We're getting there.
I mean, I would say that the total cost of ownership is not only kind of not talked about, but it's dismissed when the questions come up.
Yeah,
Because the question, like, okay, how much does this take to run?
Oh, piece of
Well, you buy the thing and you set it up, or we come in and set it up, and it just sits there.
yeah, we have SEs.
And then
They'll
it pumps
spool it
up
up for you.
Yeah,
Set it and forget it.
It pumps out reports every week, and that tells you that you're compliant, and it's great.
Yeah,
Like,
good.
well, that's not actually how this ever.
And that
ever
really,
works.
and that you're fueling my VAR fire here, which is but that's the problem. The VAR has no vested interest in telling you this.
No.
And quite frankly, it works against them because, and I can say this from our own experience, we would go in and tell companies your total loss of ownership on this 100K SIM is actually about 250. Well, of course we lost the deal because the VAR down the street, of which there are a million of them too, would say, oh, no, it's only 100K. You know,
We'll install for free.
yeah, we will install for free. And of course, the guy who told you the truth is going to win can win the business. So I think this what you're seeing at RSA, and I think where you're feeling uninspired and where a lot of this comes down to is that we've kind of hit the pinnacle of hucksterism here. And what I fear now is it's the collapse, the implosion, the fallout, the reckoning that's got to happen. And where I think you as consumers of this is that you really need to be thinking strategically. You need to be thinking the big picture. You need to be looking at what the trend is, and you need to be thinking about, more importantly, how are you going to take whatever this shiny new interesting, fascinating technology is, how is that going to integrate into the whole? And that is actually a big trend we're seeing amongst some of the big security analytics vendors, the Ciscos, the Raytheons, which is actually ForcePoint now, the Blue Coats, the IBMs. They're moving toward this, integration where everything kind of seamlessly works together. That is important because if you have a bunch of standalone stuff that doesn't integrate, it's not going to give you any real value.
I just want to add one more thing to the whole preponderance of shiny new toys in the security industry is I don't think it's fair to fully blame the VARs. The VARs would not be able to sell these appliances and these technologies if people weren't willing to buy them. And the reason is, and I hate to sound like a high school basketball coach here, but fundamentals are boring. They're tedious. Nobody wants to do them. It's much easier to go have sushi with the guy who tells you that you sign this check here, all your problems will go away when you get this thing installed, right? You don't have to worry about doing internal audit.
You don't have to work.
Yeah, right, exactly. You just
I've got a box, and you don't need to work. You can go get your.
You want to be a full-time conference attendee? No problem. Buy this, and it'll run your network for you, right? And I hate to sound cynical because look, I could feel that way myself sometimes. I get it. I certainly could use more discipline in certain types of fundamentals. But the fact of the matter is, I think that really quality of human nature helps drive this, and I think we all need to remind ourselves of that when we're looking at technologies that we're trying to augment our security program. Is that really what we need? Is that where the best use of resources, or the basics that we really should revisit? I mean, I still, almost every audit or assessment I do, see poor patch management. The most basic thing, it just not occurring consistently.
It's the least sexy thing in the world, though, because nobody wants to deal with it.
I feel like we could have this conversation virtually every threat intelligence. So we are actually getting toward the end of our time, and one of the things, unfortunately, we did not get to chat about, which I was hoping we would, which is how to actually shift the culture of the organization. And I would really just throw in at the last bit is that I think Adam really hit the nail on the head, and we've been saying this at Anitian for a long time. There really is a dearth of leadership in this industry. We don't have good leaders. We don't have people who know how to lead. And for me personally, that is important because I, over the last few years, have been learning how to become a better leader. And I've come to realize that there is no such thing as this natural leader. You have to learn the skills of leadership. And it isn't about enforcing the next internationally accepted framework. It isn't about buying the next shiny object. It is about really building a culture that gets everybody engaged, which is something I'm actually going to be talking about in some of my presentations you're going to be in Secure 360 or at the ISACA show in New Orleans. I'm doing a whole presentation on getting better engagement amongst the multi-generational workforce. Isn't that fun? At this point, I think we'll go ahead, and I think we're going to have to wrap. If anybody has any questions, however, we're happy to answer them at this point. We can go over a few more minutes and answer any questions. I don't see any on the list at this point. But if anybody does have any questions, this is a great time to ask them, and we can take a shot at answering them. What do you guys think?
You know, I just say, as far as this culture of security, I mean, the organizations I see that are the most effective, it really is, you know, to me, there's a security leadership problem, but I really see there's just a straight up leadership problem. I'm talking upper level. I'm talking the CIOs. I'm talking the CEOs. I'm talking the boards. It needs to be a top-down culture of security instilled across the board, not just a CISO who's a great CISO. Yeah, you need that, but that person's not going to succeed if all leadership is not on board with the value of security that brings to the organization. And it then needs to be disseminated down amongst all the departments when you talk about DevSecOps, right, which we don't have time to talk about here, and how did security responsibilities disseminate across the board and integrate.
So we got a question up here, which is there a good place to start with leadership? And I would recommend the place I have everybody start with leadership here at Anitian and elsewhere is read the book Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. For me, that was probably the most influential book for leadership that I've really ever read. I think once you learn the process of how to trust and how to instill trust amongst other people, that's when you really start getting into leadership. I would also encourage everybody to check out Simon Sinek's Start With Why video, which those are two things that if you've ever been to any one of my presentations, I'm always promoting those. But Start With Why by Simon Sinek is a great way to learn about how an organization needs to be structured. And Sinek's basic principle is you need to start with why. You have to, you know, people don't follow you because of what you do. They follow you because of why you do it. Why do we do it? Well, at the end of the day, we believe information security is a necessity for growth and innovation and prosperity. Security is an important fundamental component of the world. And so, you know, we end on what is ultimately our mission as a company, which is to build great security leaders. That's why we're here. I mean, that's why we're in business, is to help people like you become better at your jobs and understand this threat landscape, but also understand what's really going on in the trends of the industry. And, you know, the whole RSA froth that we do, it's fun for us, but what we're really trying to say to you is you got to, you know, be careful before you buy the next silver bullet. Be careful before you invest in that next piece of technology. I think with that, let's go ahead and wrap up, guys. And thank you very much. Thank you all for attending and listening in today. This has been fun and lively, and I appreciate everything. And guys, thanks for coming today.
Absolutely.
And we'll be back next month with a webinar on forensics, incident response, which is a great topic. So thank you again, and everybody have a great day.